This is ITV News at 10 with Gamal Fambaleh.
Good evening. The chaos surrounding last Wednesday's budget has led to the resignation of one of its key actors. It's not Rachel Reeves. The Chancellor remains in post despite more calls for her to quit. But Richard Hughes has resigned. He's the head of the OBR and took responsibility for that embarrassing mistake which saw the watchdog's report published too early. The Conservatives said he'd been used as a human shield by Rachel Reeves. They claim she misled the public by exaggerating just how dire the public finances were. Sir Keir Starmer, however, offered a full-throated defence of his Chancellor today.
Two finance leaders under pressure because of chaotic preparations for the budget. On the right, Richard Hughes, who quit today as head of the budget watchdog, the OBR, after its budget calculations were prematurely published. The Chancellor, however, clings on, despite being accused of having misled the country about the public finances. Budget day last Wednesday began as a car crash, as the Chancellor told MPs.
It is my understanding that the Office of Budget Responsibility's Economic and Financial Outlook was released on their website before this statement. This is deeply disappointing and a serious error on their part.
And today the OBR Chair Richard Hughes took responsibility after an internal investigation found that the watchdog's cybersecurity was too weak. He wrote that he needed to play my part in enabling the organisation that I've loved leading to quickly move on from this regrettable incident and would therefore resign as its chair and take full responsibility. But that's not the only budget preparation widely denigrated as bungled. The Treasury and Chancellor have been accused of overstating, of lying about the weakness of the public finances for weeks. From late September to the day of the budget, it was widely reported, including by me here at ITV, that there was a black hole in the government's finances of between £20 billion and £35 billion, because that's what we were led to believe by senior members of the government. But in fact, no such deficit ever existed in the calculations made by the OBR. Its estimate of the hole started at £2.5 billion on the 3rd of October and became a surplus of £4.2 billion at the end of October because of bumper forecast tax revenues. There was no black hole ever, though that wasn't revealed till budget day. She needed defending this morning. Her boss stepped up.
Truthfully, I have never seen preparations for a budget as shambolic as these, except for Liz Truss's mini-budget, and we all know how that ended. Is this the Chancellor's fault, or is it your fault?
He didn't answer.
But let me just deal with the substance of the budget, because it's really important that we focus on that, in my view.
Rachel Reeves should be resigning because she also had leaks which went on for 3 months right up until the budget was announced. So if the OBR chief is going, then she should go too.
But Rachel Reeves' deputy defended her, in particular against the charge that her emergency, unprecedented press conference on the 4th of November created the false impression of the public finances being in crisis.
Mr Speaker, the Chancellor took the step of delivering a speech before the budget precisely so that she could be upfront about the circumstances she was facing and the decisions that she would need to take. The Chancellor has been honest and consistent with the public in everything she has said.
An honest and consistent Chancellor? You could hear MPs' doubts. But should we care?
Public trust in politics is really at an all-time low. So any news and story about more miscommunication, the politics around this budget, I think just really distracts from what people really want to hear the government talk about, which is how the decisions they make around the budget are going to improve people's finances.
Tonight a festive rather than fiscal tradition, not quite clockwork.
3, 2, 1, go Samuel!
But maybe in the season of goodwill, the Chancellor will cling on at the top of the ministerial tree.
And Robert joins me now. Just how precarious is Rachel Reeves' position tonight?
I think very precarious. You just have to look at the reasons for the resignation of the head of the Office of Budget Responsibility, which happened this afternoon, a man called Richard Hughes. He's gone because of the incompetence of his organisation in failing to keep that incredibly sensitive budget document
private up until the moment at which the Chancellor was ready to reveal all that. Hack of the document was down to just totally inadequate cyber protections. He's not a technological expert, but because he's the boss, he took responsibility. He quit for incompetence, essentially, within his organisation. Now, there is absolutely no doubt that for about 6 weeks in the autumn, in the run-up to the budget, the Treasury and the Chancellor created this impression of this black hole in the public finances, which was never there. The reason they did that is because they wanted to create the conditions in which it would be less politically damaging. Well, originally they were going to put up the basic rate of income tax, which would have breached the manifesto, but they were always going to put up taxes. In the end, they've done it by £26 billion, including taxes on so-called working people, millions of just ordinary citizens, as it were. And they did that, as I say, by creating this sense of crisis. In fact, £17 billion, the largest share of that money went to building a sort of buffer to protect the country from future shocks. She could have made the case for that. She didn't. So many would say there was a sort of false market created in UK government debt. That is down to a different kind of incompetence. So if Richard Hughes has to go, there are many who say she has to go. Why won't she go in the short term? Because the Prime Minister made it absolutely clear when I saw him today that he's standing behind her.
Yeah, this might rumble on for some time to come. OK, Robert, thank you. To the Middle East now, where the tenuous ceasefire in Gaza has done little to mitigate the threat faced by Palestinians. John spent last week in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, areas now formally recognised as the State of Palestine by the British government. There he found upsetting and distressing evidence of an attempt to destroy people, property and culture. The perpetrators are Israeli extremists, often acting unchallenged. They use deadly violence with abandon, especially in the West Bank, where attacks by settlers have reached record levels.
A front line in the battle for the West Bank. The Palestinians wielding the torches are trying to spot Israeli settlers who might be mounting another deadly attack on their village. Unlike the men terrorizing them, the villagers are not allowed to carry firearms, and when there are confrontations, it's the Palestinians who come off second best. These pictures were recorded in July, when 2 casualties had to be rushed to hospital, where they died from their injuries. One had been shot, the other beaten. The villagers have established lookout posts and they keep an eye out around the clock. But they've already lost territory to the Israeli extremists. These houses have been abandoned thanks to repeated attacks, and settlers like this man have seized the land to use as pasture for their livestock.
Have everything. The Israeli government, they protect them by the law. They give him everything just to stay here, to steal our land.
In March, the Israelis erected this huge fence on one side of the village of Sinjil. Where bridges are needed, it's yet another barrier to reinforce division. Given that this year has seen a record number of settler attacks here on the West Bank, you might imagine that this fence was built to keep settlers out of this Palestinian village. But it wasn't. It was built to keep the Palestinians in. Today, there are only 2 gates into the village, and the Israeli Defense Forces have the keys to both of them. Naim Asfour is now cut off from his olive trees, but even if he could get to them, he wouldn't go because of the threat of settler attack. A fortnight ago, security cameras at his house recorded these pictures of Israelis vandalizing several of his cars. With the IDF unable or unwilling to stop them, it seems the settlers are targeting Sinjil at will.
My wife heard them
She saw them on the camera. She was screaming, مستوطنين مستوطنين. I went crazy. I imagined they were around the house. They're gonna burn us.
While Palestinian communities on the West Bank, like Sinjil, cannot expect the Israeli security forces to protect them, they can expect IDF raids like the ones carried out in recent days. These incursions are described as counter-terrorism operations, but among those killed in such actions this year was a 15-year-old boy called Jad Jadala. This is him on the ground shortly after being shot. Ambulance crews, on alert because of the raid, say the Israeli soldiers prevented them from getting to the boy. They pointed lasers and torches at us, signalling us to back off and not advance. Later we tried to get to him again but failed, said this paramedic who was there. Jad died where he lay. The IDF told us that this footage is proof the soldiers provided what they call initial medical treatment. However, the video runs for nearly 4.5 minutes before a soldier finally kneels down to examine the boy. The IDF also said he was a terrorist who tried to attack them. That's impossible, said his mother. He was afraid of them and just wanted to be left alone. This theatre in East Jerusalem is closed after Israeli police officers raided the place minutes before a performance by Palestinian children. Still in costume, they were visibly upset after they and the 300 people in the audience were ordered out. "You've got 5 minutes," shouted one officer. The police claim the musical production called Dreams Under the Olive Tree was improperly funded and lacked the required permit. However, the promotion flyer indicates it was funded by foreign groups, including the British Council.
The children were talking about children from 6 to 16 years old, so they were really frightened and they were really scared, and the dreams and the hope of having fun, enjoying their time, turned into crying, screaming and shouting.
It's no coincidence that the increased hostility towards Palestinians is happening while the most right-wing government in Israel's history holds power. The old city of Jerusalem is a religious melting pot, but some Israeli extremists don't like it that way, and Christians in particular have become favoured targets for spittle and abuse. This is the most senior monk in Jerusalem being spat and shouted at. And this is him being told to take off his cross. Father Nicodemus Schnabel is abbot of Dormition Abbey, one of Christianity's most important churches. He says the abuse is getting worse.
But what it's really new, it's now in daylight. It's not hidden in the very early morning hours on the very early night, and nobody else is around. No, the people realize they are caught on camera, and they don't care.
It seems that these days, for some Jewish extremists, no one and nothing else is sacred. John Irvine, News at 10, Jerusalem.
Well, John also met a Palestinian man who's been ordered by the Israeli government to demolish his home so they can build a rubbish dump. You can see his story in an extended version of our report on ITVX or the ITV News YouTube channel. Now, disaster on a continental scale has hit southern and southeastern Asia with over 1,000 dead because of extreme flooding. In Indonesia, the provinces of Aceh, North Sumatra and West Sumatra have been worst affected. But the disaster is not contained to just one country, with Thailand, Malaysia and Sri Lanka also hit by cyclones and torrential rain. In a moment, we'll hear from Debbie, who's in the Sri Lankan capital tonight. But first, Rachel has this on the extreme weather that has claimed lives and devastated communities.
In Indonesia, the rain has stopped and the floodwaters have fallen, leaving the scale of the damage shockingly clear. It's almost impossible to take in for those who once lived here. Their homes swept away, villages all but destroyed, and a frantic search still underway for the missing. Yvette's parents are among them, and the wait for any news is agonising.
We tried to get to the location, but couldn't because the road was blocked and inaccessible. We could only reach the site on Friday. The house was gone, buried by a collapsed hillside.
Outside her local hospital, there is a grim search for names as the list of the dead grows longer. Exhausted rescue teams now bringing in mostly bodies. With the waters still raging and so much destruction, many of the living are having to find their own perilous way to safety. Although the country's military has been deployed to do what it can, with Indonesia's defence minister outlining the priorities.
First, clothing for all evacuees, both adults and children. Second, we'll immediately send medicine. Third, food supplies. And fourth, drinking water. To ensure faster delivery, the Army Commander will arrange for the supplies to be airdropped.
But with bridges down, roads washed away and so much infrastructure gone, it won't be easy to move the quantities of aid so desperately needed. In this part of the world, the monsoon season is an annual event, but climate change is making extreme weather events more intense. This one exceptionally rare in its ferocity.
The affected population has been reaching 1.5 million. So this is a huge disaster. And also the displaced persons reaching around 500,000. We didn't predict the situation as bad as like this.
The floodings raged through neighbouring countries like Thailand and Malaysia, but also here in Sri Lanka, almost 3,000 miles away. Finding survivors now in such vast submerged areas feels almost miraculous amid a sea of grief and devastation. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Well, Debbie's in the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo, for us tonight. And Debbie, what is the situation where you are?
Well, Gamal, we're in one of the worst affected suburbs of Colombo. It's very rare for the capital to be affected by extreme flooding like this, but after 4 days of heavy downpours, the Kalani River, which feeds into Colombo, burst its banks, inundating communities like this with water. I'm just standing on the very edge of the floodwater, but behind me it gets up to 6-7 feet high. Several homes and businesses have been destroyed, and it is a similar picture across much of Sri Lanka. Most of the country has been affected by extreme flooding or landslides. The death toll here has risen to 390 and there are still more than 300 people missing. Tonight in the dark, the emergency services are racing to find potentially any of those that are still unaccounted for. Thankfully, there has been a break in the rain today, but there is more forecast in the coming days. This is only the start of the rainy season here in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government has declared a state of emergency. They are struggling to cope with the scale of this disaster, the worst in the country's history.
Debbie in Colombo, many thanks indeed. Talk of peace negotiations seemed a world away in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro today. A Russian missile attack in broad daylight hit a number of high-rise buildings, killing 4 and injuring dozens more. The pictures we will show you of the aftermath are heartbreaking and upsetting. A child was among the dead, the latest victims in this conflict of conquest.
The Russian missile tore through Dnipro just 4 minutes after the first alert. There was no time to take shelter from the explosion. No time to protect children who should have been safe in their neighbourhoods. No time to protect those quietly getting on with life despite the war. No time to protect those who were within the sanctuary of their own home when their lives ended. 4 in all, 4 lives snuffed out, having survived almost 4 years of this war. The injuries were extensive, the dreadful impact of the blast harming dozens of people. Some may not survive, such as the seriousness of their condition. They will not learn the outcome of this week's talks about peace. They won't know if their lives ended in the final days of this war or during yet another burst of talks which go nowhere. In Paris, President Zelensky was notified of the attack ahead of his meeting with the French president, where the two discussed what guarantees Ukraine would need to ensure long-term security after any deal. The president acknowledged one of the biggest challenges is that of territory and said the aggressor cannot be able to benefit from the aggression. This country's future will be discussed in another capital tomorrow as the US delegation of Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner and others travel to Moscow to meet with President Putin. There is real trepidation here in Kyiv about what that conversation will entail. What will President Putin demand? And what might he offer the Americans to try and sway them towards his point of view? The attacks of today would suggest that peace is not yet a priority for Moscow. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Kyiv.
More people have found themselves under investigation from a special police unit looking into the post office scandal. It's investigating whether there was a criminal cover-up over the wrongful prosecution of sub-postmasters. Officers say the number of suspects has now increased to 8. The unit is facing a monumental task with 7.5 million documents to sift through. The former Labour Minister Tulip Siddique was today sentenced to 2 years in prison in Bangladesh following a corruption trial. The MP resigned from her ministerial post earlier this year over links to her aunt Sheikh Hasina, who was the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Ms Siddique was tried in absentia by the court in Bangladesh. She's called the proceedings a complete farce. Already facing the usual winter pressures, hospitals in England will now have to deal with a doctor's strike in the run-up to Christmas. The BMA has announced that resident doctors, those previously known as junior doctors, will hold another 5-day walkout. Rebecca is here with the details. What more do we know, Rebecca?
Well, the reaction from within the NHS tonight has been punchy, to say the least. NHS England describing it as totally reckless, NHS providers calling it inflammatory. The walkout just days before Christmas, between the 17th and the 22nd of December, will hit hospitals as they are already experiencing immense pressures as they deal with rising flu cases and all the extra winter pressures. And this will inevitably affect patients. The dispute is about pay and jobs. Resident doctors in England have received around a 30% pay rise in recent years, but the BMA says they deserve a further rise over the next few years to make up for pay erosion, and they want a plan to tackle what they call the jobs crisis. The Health Secretary has repeatedly said he can't go any further on pay, but he has said tonight that he stands ready to do a deal, and he tells resident doctors that they should ignore the BMA's attempts to turn them into the Grinch who stole Christmas. If this strike does go ahead, it will be the 14th walkout in recent years. Each one of those leads to tens of thousands of cancelled appointments and costs the NHS hundreds of millions of pounds. So I think not only will the BMA need to win over the government, it also looks like they'll need to win over the public. Recent polls suggest that public support for these strikes has deteriorated dramatically.
OK, Rebecca, thank you. The world of equestrian is tonight remembering Vallegro, the most decorated dressage horse in British history. With his rider, Charlotte Dujardin, he won 3 Olympic gold medals, including double gold at London 2012. Their world record score, set 2 years later, stands to this day. Vallegro's owner, Carl Hester, said he was put to sleep following health complications in his old age. He said the loss was hard to comprehend. Now, large swathes of the countryside will be returned to nature as part of the government's plan to meet the UK's climate targets. A number of sites, which combined make up an area the size of Greater London, have been earmarked for restoration. It's not the first time a plan like this has been announced. The last government had a similar scheme, which environmentalists said wasn't nearly enough.
Until 25 years ago, we would have been stood in the middle of a ploughed field.
Knepp Estate in Sussex is the ultimate blue, or rather green print for rewilding.
We've got red kites in the air, we've got white storks flying around. It's just incredible what's happened here in 2 decades.
Once degraded farmland is now home to turtle doves, nightingales, beavers and purple emperor butterflies.
Actually having areas that are benefiting biodiversity indirectly then obviously benefits food production as well, because we're improving soil ecology, we're improving air quality, water quality, pollinating insects. This is almost having that knock-on effect to food production in other areas.
This sort of land restoration is central to the government's new environmental improvement plan. £500 million earmarked to rewild corridors of Britain.
We want this river to do what it would do naturally.
And restore rivers like the Ada to create natural flood zones. There are also promises to protect us from forever chemicals, clamp down on fly tipping and clean up the air, potentially by putting restrictions on wood-burning stoves.
We are planting more trees than at any time in the last 20 years. We are going to reduce air pollution and we're also boosting biodiversity. So there's a huge amount of ambition, but it's also deliverable.
But environmental groups aren't all convinced. Wildlife and Countryside Link took the last government to court over its nature plans.
It's an improvement on the previous plan because now we can see how the government's intending to turn around that long-term chronic decline in wildlife. But what we don't know yet is whether the government's going to take the action that's needed to turn the lovely language that's in the environmental improvement plan into action.
The UK is currently one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world.
These are the drivers of our nature recovery, essentially. These are the ones that are doing the legwork or the chewing work, as it may be.
To give you the scale of the challenge, Knepp's 3,500 acres equate to just 0.5% of all the land planned for restoration in just 5 years. Martin Stew, News at 10, Sussex.
Tonight, despite the so-called special relationship, the UK and US take a rather different approach when it comes to Christmas decor. We saw earlier how Downing Street unveiled their decorations, a fairly traditional take with a choir, some carols and notably just one tree on show today. But the White House hasn't shown such restraints. Their decorations were also revealed today, including all 51 Christmas trees. We're told that Melania Trump was in charge of it all. There's also a portrait of President Trump made of Lego on show, as well as a gingerbread White House weighing over 90 kilograms. Very impressive stuff. That is it for tonight. Many thanks indeed for watching from all of us here. I hope you have a very restful evening. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.